My name is Odie Calloway. Everyone calls me Odie. I'm 29 years old. For 21 years, my family called me the careless one, while my sister Josephine collected Yale honors and boardroom promises. They mocked my stutter at holiday tables, left me off every family email chain, and paid me less than a parking valet makes downtown. But on Josephine's wedding day, in a restored carriage house on Beacon Hill, in front of 210 guests, a stranger in a gray overcoat pressed an envelope into my hands that would undo every story my parents ever told about who I was. What they didn't know was that my grandmother had been watching for years. She'd seen every dinner, every dismissal, every time I was talked over instead of talked to. And 3 years before she died, she'd quietly built something that would flip our family's entire auction house empire on its head. The Calloways were old Boston, the kind of family whose name sat on brass plaques outside the Museum of Fine Arts and inside the donor wing of 2 hospitals. My father, Desmond Calloway, ran Calloway & Vance, a fine art and antiques auction house my grandmother, Louisa Vance, had built from a single consignment shop on Charles Street in 1968. By last year, the house was appraised at $86 million, with satellite offices in New York and Palm Beach. I was born with a stutter. Not the mild kind that smooths out with a little practice, the kind that catches on certain consonants and turns a simple sentence into a minefield. A speech pathologist diagnosed me at 8. My parents' response wasn't patience. It was embarrassment. When I was 11, they hired a private tutor for Josephine, a chess coach, a debate coach, an SAT specialist who charged $300 an hour and drove up from Providence twice a week. When I asked if I could see a specialist about my speech, my mother, Corinne, just pressed her lips together. Odette, we've already spent a fortune on Josephine's coaching. Some children are naturally quick, and some children just need to slow down and accept who they are. I was 11. I believed her. So I stopped asking. I taught myself to write everything down instead of speaking it, to draw diagrams when words failed me, to notice details other people rushed past. Every other Saturday, I took the tea out to my grandmother Louise's apartment above the old shop on Charles Street, where she'd let me sit for hours among crated paintings and estate boxes, teaching me not through lectures but through objects. "Odie," she told me once, turning an old signature ring over in her weathered fingers, "you don't talk fast, but you notice what's real and what's been dressed up to look real. That's not a flaw, sweetheart. That's an eye most people spend their whole careers trying to buy." I didn't fully understand her then. I would, eventually. But first I had 21 more years of being the Calloway family's quiet embarrassment. Thanksgiving of 2019, 19 relatives crowded around the long table in my parents' Beacon Hill townhouse. Silver candlesticks, a caterer from the North End, the annual performance of Calloway family excellence. My father stood at the head of the table, wine glass raised. "I have an announcement," he said, his voice carrying that auctioneer's authority he wore like a second skin. "Josephine has been accepted into Yale Law's dual program in art law and estate litigation. Full merit scholarship." Applause. Cheers. Josephine smiled with rehearsed modesty. "My eldest," my father continued, beaming, "will be the first Calloway to hold a law degree in this family's history. She's going to protect everything your great-grandmother built." More applause. My Aunt Deborah clapped Josephine on the back. My Uncle Walt raised his glass in a toast. Then my father's eyes drifted down the table. To me. "And Odie is here too," he said. The warmth drained clean out of his voice. A few cousins laughed, that soft, uncomfortable laugh people make when they don't know what else to do with silence. Josephine didn't defend me. She smiled along with them. I looked down at my plate, at the cranberry sauce blurring through tears I refused to let fall. Under the table, a hand found mine. Thin fingers, papery skin, rings loose on bony knuckles. Grandma Louisa, seated across from me, squeezed once, hard. When I looked up, her eyes held something I'd never seen directed at her own son before. Something close to fury. She said nothing. Not that night. But 4 months later, she called me to her apartment and told me she needed to show me something important. I didn't know it yet, but that Thanksgiving dinner, that one small cruelty performed in front of 19 witnesses, had started a clock that would take 4 years to run out. After finishing a state school in Western Massachusetts in 2021, no Ivy, never an Ivy, I applied for a position at Calloway and Vance. I wanted to prove the family business could be mine too, not just Josephine's. My father agreed to bring me on as a junior cataloger. Salary, $38,000 a year. That same season, Josephine joined as Director of Provenance and Legal Affairs. Her salary, $260,000, plus bonuses tied to sale totals. My job consisted of photographing lots, typing condition reports, and carrying boxes up from the vault for specialists who never bothered learning my name. I wasn't invited into a single authentication meeting. Never shown a single high-value consignment before it went to auction. But I watched, and I listened, and somewhere in those long hours in the archive room, I discovered something about myself. I could spot inconsistencies other people rushed straight past. A signature that sat 1 degree too crisp on aged canvas. A frame with hardware 20 years newer than the paint. A provenance letter typed on paper stock that hadn't existed yet in the year it claimed. It was a skill I'd built to survive my own mind, and somewhere along the way, it had become something else entirely. Grandma Louisa had taught me this without ever calling it a lesson. On those Saturday afternoons in her cluttered apartment, she'd lay out decades-old consignment files and show me how to read them, not word by word, but as whole systems, patterns, weight and light and time all telling the same story or contradicting each other. Your father reads a provenance file like a salesman, she told me once in early 2020, not long before her health started slipping. He looks for what he can push through. You read it like a conservator. You see what's actually there. That same afternoon, she pressed a small tin box into my hands, its hinges gone soft green with age. Keep this somewhere safe, she said. Don't open it yet. You'll know when it's time. I brought it home, buried it in the back of my closet, and tried to forget the strange weight in her voice. March of 2020, Grandma Louisa's apartment. She was 84 then, her once sharp posture folded into a wingback chair, her silver hair thinning against a knitted throw, but her eyes hadn't dulled one bit. Sit, Odie. I sat where I always sat, surrounded by photographs covering every wall. Louisa cutting the ribbon on the Charles Street shop in 1968. Louisa shaking hands with a governor. Louisa accepting a Lifetime Achievement Award from the New England Appraisers Guild in 1991. Not one photo of my father running anything. I built this house out of a card table and a good eye, she said, her voice carrying 6 decades of steel. Your father inherited it. He never built a single thing in his life. He doesn't understand what it costs to make something from nothing. Grandma, he judges people by their resumes, their degrees, how well they perform in a boardroom. She leaned forward. I judge people by how they treat the ones who can't fight back. And you, Odette, are the only one in this family who still knows how. She pressed the tin box deeper into my palms. There's something inside that might help you one day. But not yet. You're not ready, and neither is your father. When he finally shows you exactly who he is, you'll know what to do. 18 months later, she was gone. Lung disease, quiet and slow. I was the only family member sitting beside her bed at the end. The tin box stayed shut in my closet. April of last year. The email landed on a Tuesday afternoon. Subject line, role restructuring, confidential. Dear Ms. Calloway, as part of our department realignment, your position as junior cataloger will be eliminated. Effective July 1st. Human Resources will reach out regarding transition support. I read it 3 times. The words kept catching, the way they always do when I'm upset, but the meaning never changed. They were letting me go. That night, I stayed late reorganizing files nobody would ever look at again. Through the thin wall separating the archive room from my father's office, I heard voices. My father and mother. We can't have her cataloging next to Josephine's office once the wedding's behind us, my father was saying. It looks bad. The director's own sister filing condition reports in the back room. Clients ask questions. What kind of questions? My mother asked. Why she's never been promoted. Why we've kept her tucked away for 2 years. Why she's the way she is. A pause. My mother's answer came soft, almost tender. We've done everything we reasonably could for her, Desmond. Some people just aren't built for this kind of work. Exactly. Generous severance, and she can find something better suited to her. I pressed my palm flat against the wall. $38,000 a year, split 3 ways with roommates in a Dorchester triple-decker, no savings, no cushion. If I lost this job, I'd be short on rent within 6 weeks. But the money wasn't what tightened my chest. It was the realization settling into me like cold water. If I let them do this quietly, if I accepted their version of who I was, I would spend the rest of my life being the family's cautionary tale, not because I'd actually failed at anything, but because I'd never once been given a real chance to try. Josephine's wedding was in 3 days. I wondered what else my father had planned to announce. The following Saturday, the Estabrook carriage house on Beacon Hill glowed under strings of amber lights. 210 guests filled the restored stone hall, museum trustees, gallery owners, attorneys from downtown firms, cousins I barely recognized anymore. A string quartet worked through Vivaldi near the bar. This was my father's kingdom for the evening, his stage, the place where he played patriarch and empire builder in the same breath. I stood near the entrance, tugging at the hem of a navy dress I'd bought on clearance for $62, the most I could spare on my salary. Everyone else shimmered in couture. My mother intercepted me before I'd taken 3 steps. Her eyes swept from my drugstore lipstick down to my flats, and her mouth thinned. Odette. Couldn't you have found something more appropriate? This is what I have. She adjusted the clasp on her pearls. You're at table 19, near the kitchen doors. Try not to draw attention to yourself tonight. This is Josephine's evening. Whatever you're feeling, keep it to yourself. Don't embarrass this family. She walked off before I could answer. Table 19 sat behind a stone column at the far edge of the room. My tablemates were second cousins I'd met maybe once, at a funeral. From my seat, I could just make out the head table, the massive framed photo of Josephine and her new husband beneath a banner reading "Congratulations, Josephine and Adrian." And near the entrance, standing alone, not drinking, not mingling, a silver-haired man in a gray overcoat. He wasn't there for the wedding. He was watching the room the way an appraiser watches a room full of forgeries, patiently, and with total certainty about what he already knew. At 9 o'clock, the quartet stopped. The lights dimmed. A single spotlight found my father at the head table, champagne raised. "Friends, thank you all for celebrating my daughter tonight." Applause started before he even finished the sentence. Josephine graduated top of her class at Yale Law. She clerked for a federal appellate judge. And as of this spring, she's been named partner track counsel at one of the finest art law practices on the East Coast. His voice swelled with pride. But tonight isn't only about celebrating what she's already done. It's about announcing what comes next. Josephine rose to join him, radiant in ivory silk. Effective this year, Josephine will take over as chief executive of Calloway and Vance the day I step back. That includes the Beacon Hill townhouse, currently valued at $11 million. A restored 1967 Jaguar E-Type from our own private collection. He paused for effect. And most importantly, full controlling authority over the house my mother built. The room erupted, a standing ovation, camera flashes flooding the hall. Josephine dabbed at her eyes with practiced grace. 210 people celebrating, and not one of them so much as glanced toward table 19. The cousin beside me, a woman I'd met once at a funeral 8 years back, leaned over. "Odie, right? So what does this mean for you?" I opened my mouth and nothing useful came out, just the familiar catch on the O. What could I even say? That I'd just watched myself get formally written out of my own family. That the restructuring email in my inbox was only the opening move. That every quiet fear I'd carried since I was 11 had just been confirmed in front of everyone who mattered to my parents. The applause faded. Josephine embraced our father. Cameras kept clicking, and through the crowd, the silver-haired man near the door began walking, slowly, deliberately, straight toward my table, like he'd been waiting all evening for this exact moment. He stopped in front of me. Up close he looked to be in his early 60s, deep-set eyes, the careful posture of a man who'd spent decades in courtrooms and probate hearings. "Miss Calloway?" "That's me. My name is Marcus Feld." He passed me a heavy cream card. "Feld and Ostrander, Trusts and Estates." "I represented your grandmother." "My grandmother." The words landed like a physical blow. "Louisa passed away 3 years ago." "I'm aware," he said, not softening at all. "She left something for you, with very specific instructions about when it should be delivered." From inside his coat he produced a cream envelope, sealed in wax with a notary stamp pressed into it. "What is this?" "Her will. The real one." His voice dropped. "The one your father doesn't know exists." I stared at the seal. Feld and Ostrander, dated October the 4th, 2020. 5 months after that afternoon in her apartment. 5 months after she'd handed me the tin box. "I don't understand." "Your grandmother gave me exact instructions. I was to deliver this document on the day your father publicly named a successor other than you." He glanced toward the head table where my father and Josephine were still posing for photographs. "I believe that's exactly what just happened." My hands shook as I took the envelope. "Mr. Feld, what's inside this?" For the first time, something like warmth crossed his face. "Your grandmother told me to tell you. Give this to Odie the day Desmond finally shows her who he really is. By then, she'll be ready." He straightened his coat. "I'll be reachable when you have questions. You have my card." Then he turned and disappeared into the crowd near the bar. I couldn't stay in that room. I pushed through a side door into an empty stone corridor behind the kitchen, fluorescent light buzzing overhead, the sounds of the party dulled to a distant hum. My fingers trembled as I broke the wax seal. Inside were 4 pages of dense legal language, a notarized signature, and that same October date. I forced myself to read slowly, letter by letter, the way I've always had to. I, Louisa Marguerite Vance, being of sound mind, do hereby revoke all prior testamentary instruments and declare this to be my final will. My eyes caught on a paragraph near the middle. To my granddaughter, Odette Marie Calloway, I bequeath 55% of my voting shares in Calloway and Vance, currently valued at approximately $47 million, along with full authority to call an emergency shareholder review. I read it again. 55%. Controlling interest. The will continued. This bequest is made with complete knowledge of how my son Desmond has treated Odette. She has been excluded, spoken over, and denied opportunity, not for any lack of ability, but for a lack of support she was never given the chance to earn. Odette does not lack anything. Odette was simply never looked at closely enough. I will not permit my son's blindness to continue governing this house after I am gone. A sob caught in my throat. Grandma had seen everything. Every dinner. Every dismissal. Condition: to activate this bequest, Odette must formally file for an emergency shareholder review within 96 hours of receiving this document. Failure to act within that window renders this instrument void, and all assets revert to my 2016 will. 96 hours. The deadline would land at 9 o'clock on Wednesday night. I leaned against the cold stone wall, the will pressed to my chest. My grandmother had handed me a weapon. Now I had to decide whether I was brave enough to use it. Marcus Feld was waiting by the coat check when I finally came back through. You read it. The 96-hour clause, my voice caught on the C, twice. Why would she add that? Your grandmother knew you, Miss Calloway. He handed me a second card, a private cell number written on the back in blue ink. She said if she gave you unlimited time, you'd talk yourself out of it by morning. That deadline isn't a punishment. It's permission. Permission to stop waiting for people who were never going to change their minds about you. He checked his watch. The window closes Wednesday at 9. If you want to proceed, you'll need to file a formal request for an emergency shareholder review. I can help you draft it tonight. Through the doorway, I could see my father still posing for photos, my mother circulating through the crowd, accepting congratulations she hadn't earned. If I did this, if I filed that request, I would detonate every relationship I had left. My parents would never speak to me the same way again. Josephine would call it sabotage on her wedding night. But if I said nothing, I would agree with their version of me. I would become exactly what they'd always called me, careless, slow, the daughter who simply didn't count. Miss Calloway, Feld's voice cut through the spiral. Your grandmother believed in you long before tonight. She spent the last 3 years of her life setting this up. The only question left is whether you believe her. I looked down at the will, at my grandmother's careful signature, the same hand that had once turned old signature rings over in the lamplight and taught me to see what was real. I'll call you tomorrow, I said, my voice steadying on the last word. We're filing the request. Feld allowed himself a small, satisfied nod. She said you would. I want to pause the story here for a second. If you've ever been the one people underestimated, the one who got talked over at every family dinner, type the word "seen" in the comments below. I want to know I'm not the only one who's lived this. And if you want to find out what happened when Odie walked into that boardroom, stay with me, because this is only the beginning. That night, back in my Dorchester apartment, roommates asleep down the hall, I finally opened the tin box. Streetlight striped orange across my bedspread as I lifted the lid, hinges creaking with 3 years of rust. Inside sat a handwritten letter on my grandmother's stationery, a fragile ledger page dated 1968, and a small analog microcassette, the kind that used to click into an old dictation recorder. I reached for the letter first. My dearest Odie, if you're reading this, then Marcus has done his job, and your father has finally done exactly what I feared he would. I'm sorry I couldn't shield you while I was alive, but I can protect you now. The enclosed ledger page is the original founding record from 1968, back when I ran this house out of one rented storefront with a single part-time clerk. It establishes that founders' shares carry permanent voting rights that cannot be diluted without a full board vote. Your father has never seen this page. The cassette holds something else, something I don't think he remembers I recorded. In 2018, Desmond proposed a motion to reduce my voting rights from 55% to 12%, claiming I was too far removed from modern valuation methods to keep steering the House. The motion failed by 1 vote. Mine. I never forgot what he tried to do to his own mother, and I never forgave the way he used your differences to justify it, as if pointing at you somehow proved I wasn't fit to lead either. Use this carefully, Odie. Not for revenge. For truth. All my love, Grandma Louisa. I dug an old cassette player out of a moving box and pressed play. My father's voice filled the small room, tinny and unmistakable. Mother is 82. She's simply not tracking current valuation practices anymore. I'm proposing we reduce her voting share to 12%, effective immediately. A long pause, then Louisa's own voice, calm and razor-edged. Desmond, I built this house before you could walk. The recording clicked off there. Documented, time-stamped, undeniable. Wednesday morning, 9:15. Rosalind Byrne answered on the second ring. Odie Calloway, she said, her voice carrying the rasp of 40 years in this industry. I've been wondering when you'd call. You know who I am. Sweetheart, your grandmother and I built half the appraisal circuit in this city together back in the 70s. She talked about you constantly. A pause. She also told me about the will 3 years ago, right before she passed. I gripped the phone tighter. Then you know what I'm about to do. I know what you're considering. There's a difference. Filing for an emergency shareholder review requires 3 board members to sign the petition. I'm one. You'll need 2 more. Can you help me find them? I can do better than that. Papers rustled on her end of the line. Your father isn't nearly as popular with this board as he thinks he is. At least 3 other members have raised concerns privately for years. They just need someone to go first. Hope sparked, small and sharp, in my chest. Who? Nathaniel Kwan. Priya Osei. They've both sat through his temper in closed sessions and said nothing, until now. I'll make some calls, Rosalind said. Odie, I need you to understand this won't be gentle. Your father will fight. Your sister will fight harder. They'll say things about you that aren't fair. They've been saying unfair things about me my whole life. At least now I get to answer. Rosalind laughed, warm and genuine. Louisa always said you had steel hiding under all that quiet. I'm starting to see exactly what she meant. The next afternoon, Josephine found out. She called me 40 minutes after the notice hit the board's inbox, her voice tight with fury. What did you do? I was sitting at my cataloging desk, pretending to log condition reports. I filed a request. Dad just got an emergency notice. 3 board members requesting a shareholder review. Rosalind Byrne hasn't requested anything in 15 years. A pause, sharp as broken glass. What did you do, Odie? Maybe she has concerns about how the house is being run. Don't play games with me. Her composure cracked down the middle. If you're trying to ruin my wedding week, trying to make some kind of scene. I'm just doing my job, Josephine. Same as always. She hung up without a goodbye. 20 minutes later, my father stormed past my desk toward his office, not looking at me once, and slammed his door hard enough to rattle the archive shelves. Through the wall, I heard him on the phone. Absolute waste of the board's time. Rosalind's probably lost the thread completely. We'll address whatever this is and move on. A pause. No, I'm not concerned. Odie? My God, she can barely read a balance sheet without help. She's not a threat to anyone. I almost smiled. For the first time in 29 years, being underestimated felt like an advantage. That night I prepared. I printed 3 copies of the will. I transferred the cassette recording onto my phone as backup. I wrote out a short statement, not an accusation, just a plain presentation of facts, reading it aloud to myself a dozen times until the stutter loosened its grip on the hardest words. Marcus Feld confirmed he'd attend as the authenticating attorney. Rosalind texted at 11 that night, petition filed. See you tomorrow. Your grandmother would be proud. I barely slept, but for once it wasn't dread keeping me awake. It was something closer to readiness. The following morning, the elevator opened onto the 4th floor of the Calloway and Vance headquarters on Newbury Street. Floor-to-ceiling glass, restored oak paneling, the kind of quiet opulence built to make people feel small the moment they walked in. I stepped out in a second-hand charcoal blazer, carrying a leather folio I'd found at a consignment shop for $18. The receptionist at the boardroom door glanced at her tablet and frowned. Name? Odie Calloway. You're not on today's attendee list. I'm an employee of this house, and I have business with the board. Ma'am, this is a closed session. Is there a problem? Josephine's voice, behind me. I turned. She looked flawless in a navy suit, the uniform of someone who belonged in every room she entered. Odie? What are you doing here? I have information for the board. Information, she repeated, laughing sharply. About what? You catalog lots in the back room. The subject is confidential. You can barely get through a sentence without stalling. Since when do you present anything to anyone? Before I could answer, our father appeared at the end of the hallway flanked by 2 senior appraisers. What's going on? Here? Odie wants into the board meeting, Josephine said. I was just explaining that's not possible. My father looked at me the way he always had, like a scuff mark he couldn't quite buff out. Odie, go back to the archive room. This doesn't concern you. Actually, a voice called from inside the boardroom. It does. Rosalind Byrne appeared in the doorway, 70 years old, silver hair pinned back, standing with the quiet authority of someone who'd been closing million-dollar sales when my father was still in prep school. I invited her. She has standing to address this board. She held the door. Let her in. My father's jaw tightened. For a second I thought he might physically block the entrance, but Rosalind had 31 years on the board. Her weight in that room outmatched his. Fine, he said, ice in every syllable. Let her speak. We'll see how far she gets. The boardroom was smaller than I'd imagined, an oval mahogany table, a dozen leather chairs, portraits of past directors on the walls, including my grandmother Louisa, her painted eyes seeming to watch from above the fireplace like she'd been waiting for this exact morning. 12 board members took their seats. My father sat at the head, Josephine to his right, not yet officially a director but positioned like an heir apparent. I was directed to a chair at the far end of the table, the children's seat of corporate governance. In the corner, Marcus Feld sat with his briefcase and caught my eye once, nodding. The chairman, Nathaniel Kwan, a soft-spoken man who'd known my grandmother for decades, called the room to order. This emergency session was requested by Rosalind Byrne, Priya Osei, and myself. Rosalind, you have the floor. Thank you, she said. The matter concerns a document that recently came to light, one that affects ownership of this house. I yield my remaining time to Ms. Odie Calloway. Every eye in the room turned to me. Josephine smirked. My father leaned back with theatrical boredom. I stood. My hands were steadier than I expected, though the words still caught here and there on the way out. Thank you, Mr. Kwan, and thank you to this board. What I'm about to share may surprise some of you. I only ask that you hear the evidence before you decide anything. My father raised a hand before I'd gotten further. Before this board wastes any more time, he said, buttoning his jacket with deliberate slowness, I think some context is warranted. Odette is my daughter, and I love her, but she isn't qualified to address matters of ownership. She's a junior cataloger. No legal background, no finance training. Josephine added, honey dripping off every word, Odie also has a significant speech impairment. We've tried to support her, but some limitations simply can't be worked around with effort alone. A few directors shifted in their seats, visibly uncomfortable. What we're seeing here, my father continued, is a young woman acting out, likely stung by the announcement at her sister's own wedding. Sibling jealousy, nothing more. Mr. Calloway, Nathaniel's voice cut through like a gavel, she'll have the chance to respond, but Ms. Calloway requested this time, and she's entitled to it. My father sat, his expression promising consequences later. Josephine mouthed, "You're embarrassing yourself," across the table. I looked at them both and felt something shift, not anger exactly, something colder and clearer. They weren't protecting me. They were protecting the version of the story where I was nothing. Thank you, Mr. Kwan, I said. I won't be discussing my speech today. I'll be discussing this. I lifted the will. The room went quiet. This is the final will and testament of Louisa Marguerite Vance, founder of this house, notarized October 4, 2020. My father's face drained of color. That's not possible, he said, his voice cracking. My mother's will was executed in 2016. I have a copy. You have a copy of her prior will, I said, keeping my voice level, letting the stutter fall where it fell instead of fighting it. Under Massachusetts law, a later valid will automatically revokes all earlier instruments. This will was executed 4 years after the one you're holding. I slid the document to Nathaniel Kwan. Mr. Feld, would you confirm the authenticity of this document? Marcus rose. I'm Marcus Feld, partner at Feld and Ostrander. I served as Louisa Vance's personal counsel from 2011 until her death. I can confirm this will was executed in my office, witnessed by 2 independent notaries. The original remains in escrow at Beacon Trust. Nathaniel studied the pages, his eyebrows rising. This bequeaths 55% of Calloway and Vance shares, he looked up at me, to you, Ms. Calloway. Murmurs moved down the table. That's a forgery, Josephine said, though her voice had lost its edge. It isn't, Marcus said flatly. And I'd caution against accusations of fraud without evidence. My firm's reputation speaks for itself. My father slammed his palm on the table. This is absurd. My mother was ill. She was being manipulated. Manipulated, I repeated. I pulled out my phone. Then perhaps you can explain this. I pressed play. My father's own voice filled the room, tinny through the phone speaker. Mother is 82. She's simply not tracking current valuation practices anymore. I'm proposing we reduce her voting share to 12%, effective immediately. The recording ended. The silence afterward was absolute. That was a private conversation, my father said, his face gone a mottled shade of red. She recorded it, I said. As was her right as majority shareholder. Nathaniel set the will down, his expression sliding from neutral to something much harder. Miss Calloway, would you read the relevant clause aloud, for the record? I nodded, took a breath, and read, This bequest is made with complete knowledge of how my son Desmond has treated Odette. She has been excluded, spoken over, and denied opportunity, not for any lack of ability, but for a lack of support she was never given the chance to earn. I looked directly at my father. You confused credentials for character. You pushed me aside because I reminded you of the kind of leader your own mother wanted this house to have, and you weren't it. My father said nothing. His hands, I noticed, were trembling. This doesn't prove anything, Josephine said, though her voice had gone brittle. Even if the will holds, which we will contest, Odie has no leadership experience. She can't run anything. I'm not asking to run the house, I told the full board. I'm asking you to look at the facts. I pulled out the ledger page. In 1968, my grandmother founded this house on the terms in this record. Founders' shares carry permanent voting rights that cannot be diluted without full board approval. In 2018, my father proposed exactly that, a motion to reduce her voting rights from 55% to 12%, on the record I just played you. Rosalind confirmed it, nodding slowly. It's accurate. Louisa called me the night it happened. She wasn't upset because the motion would fail, she knew it would. She was upset that her own son had tried to take everything she'd built out from under her. This is ancient history, my father started. It's evidence, I said, cutting him off, that my grandmother wasn't confused when she wrote this will. She was protecting the house from her own son, and protecting me. Nathaniel looked around the table. Does anyone else have documentation contradicting what's been presented? Silence. Desmond? My father's jaw worked, but no words came. Josephine? My sister stared at the table, her poise finally cracked all the way through. The board recessed for legal review. 40 minutes stretched into an hour. Their outside counsel spent the entire time on the phone with Feld and Ostrander, with Beacon Trust, with the state probate registry. I sat alone at the far end of the table. Marcus brought me water. Rosalind squeezed my shoulder as she passed. My father and Josephine argued in hushed, furious tones by the window. When the board reconvened, Nathaniel read from his notes. Our outside counsel confirms the following. The will presented by Ms. Calloway is valid under Massachusetts law and supersedes all prior instruments. Effective immediately, Odette Calloway holds 55% of Calloway and Vance shares. Someone inhaled sharply. As majority shareholder, Ms. Calloway has the right to bring motions before this board, including matters of executive leadership. He looked at me. Do you have a motion you wish to bring forward? I stood. My heart pounded, but my voice held. I have one motion. My father rose from his seat. Robert, this is a sit down, Desmond, Nathaniel said, steel in his voice I hadn't heard before. Miss Calloway has the floor. My father sat, his face gray. I looked around the table at 12 people who, an hour earlier, hadn't considered me capable of much of anything. I'm not proposing to remove Desmond Calloway as chief executive, I said. The tension in the room shifted. Josephine's head snapped up. Even Rosalind looked surprised. What I am proposing is a vote of confidence. This board will decide whether my father retains its confidence as chief executive. If the majority votes no confidence, he resigns within 30 days. If the majority votes confidence, I won't interfere in daily operations for the duration of my tenure as majority shareholder. This is absurd, Josephine stood. You're turning a board meeting into a spectacle. No, I said, meeting her eyes without a single stutter. This is corporate governance. The same process every well-run house follows, the same process my grandmother wrote into these bylaws 40 years ago. I paused. If Dad has this board's confidence, he has nothing to worry about. Nathaniel studied me for a long moment, something like respect flickering across his face. Is there a second for this motion? Seconded, Rosalind said without hesitation. Then we vote. All in favor of confidence in Desmond Calloway as chief executive, raise your hands. For hands rose, his allies, people who owed their seats to his recommendation. All opposed. 8 hands went up. Nathaniel counted twice, then set down his pen. The motion carries 8-4. Per Section 11 of our bylaws, Mr. Calloway, you have 30 days to submit your resignation. My father stood, looked at me, really looked at me, for what might have been the first time in my life. I expected rage. What I saw instead was recognition, the slow understanding that he had underestimated me so completely he'd lost everything because of it. He walked out without a word. I know some of you are wondering right now why I didn't just have him removed on the spot. Why give him 30 days at all? It's because revenge isn't the same thing as justice, and because destroying someone doesn't undo what they did to you, and because my grandmother didn't raise me to be cruel, she raised me to be fair. If any part of that lands for you, drop a like, hit subscribe, because we're not finished yet. My father caught me in the private corridor outside the boardroom. My mother stood beside him, mascara streaked. Someone must have called her during the recess. You, my father's voice was barely controlled. You ungrateful, scheming, not here, my mother said, gripping his arm. She just destroyed this family in front of a dozen strangers. I told the truth, I said, standing my ground. The truth, my father laughed bitterly. Your grandmother was manipulated. That lawyer, Feld, he must have, Grandma wrote that 5 months after you tried to strip her voting rights, because she saw exactly who you are. My voice didn't waver. You didn't lose today because I betrayed you. You lost because you betrayed her first. My mother stepped closer. Odette, sweetheart, you have to understand, we were trying to protect you. You've always struggled, and we didn't want to pile on pressure. You didn't protect me. You erased me. 21 years of silence crystallized into words. Every dinner, every family photo, every time you talked about Josephine's achievements like I wasn't sitting right there. That wasn't protection. That was abandonment. That's not fair. You're right, it wasn't fair, I said, meeting my mother's eyes. I spent my whole life trying to prove I deserved a place in this family. I'm done proving anything. The documents speak for themselves. My father grabbed my arm. This isn't over. We'll contest that will. You'll lose, and you know it, because Grandma Louisa planned for exactly this. I pulled free and walked toward the elevator. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice. Odette, wait. I didn't wait. For the first time in my life, I didn't need their permission to leave. The elevator doors closed on both their faces. I leaned against the cool steel wall and finally let myself breathe. The adrenaline that had carried me through the last 2 hours started to drain out, leaving something unexpected behind, not triumph exactly, something closer to grief. I had just severed 21 years of hoping things might eventually change, of believing that if I stayed patient enough, quiet enough, good enough, my parents would finally see me the way they saw Josephine. That hope was gone now. I'd killed it myself. Marcus Feld was waiting by the lobby security desk when the elevator reached the ground floor. That was, he searched for the right word, remarkable. It was necessary. Your grandmother would agree. He fell into step beside me toward the revolving doors. What happens now? Now I go home, sleep, and figure out what my life looks like without the family I thought I had, and without wanting to run this company at all. I stopped at the doors. I never wanted to be chief executive. I just want the house my grandmother built to be led by someone who actually cares about it, not someone who sees it as an inheritance they're owed. Marcus nodded slowly. The board will want a transition conversation, your role going forward. I know. Not today. I pushed through the door and felt the October sunlight hit my face. Today I just need to be Odie Calloway, not a shareholder, not a headline. Tomorrow, I looked back up at the glass tower carrying my family's name. Tomorrow I start building something new. My father signed his resignation letter 3 weeks later. I wasn't in the room. I found out through an email from Nathaniel Kwan. Ms. Calloway, your father has tendered his resignation effective the end of this month. The board has appointed me interim chief executive while we search for permanent leadership. Additionally, the board would like to offer you a formal role as strategic advisor and head of a new authentication division, allowing you to shape major decisions while you determine your longer-term relationship with the house. I read the email 3 times, out of habit, and forwarded it to Marcus for review. His reply came within the hour, fair offer. No hidden strings. Congratulations, OD. That evening, a staff-wide notice went out. Effective this month, Desmond Calloway will step down as chief executive. Nathaniel Kwan will serve as interim chief executive. Additionally, the board welcomes Odette Calloway as strategic advisor and founding director of a new authentication and provenance division. We thank Desmond for his years of leadership and wish him well going forward. My phone filled with messages, colleagues I'd worked beside for 2 years, people who'd never bothered learning my name, suddenly eager to grab coffee, to reconnect. I ignored most of them, but one stood out, from Patricia Hollis, an executive assistant who'd worked with my grandmother since 1989. OD, Louisa used to talk about you all the time. She said you saw what other people missed. I didn't understand what she meant until today. Welcome to the boardroom. She would be so proud. I saved that message. Some validation doesn't come from family. Sometimes that's better. 1 week later, the story went public. The Boston Business Chronicle ran a piece titled Calloway and Vance Sees Leadership Shakeup as Founder's Granddaughter Steps Forward. The article didn't name me directly, Corporate privacy rules prevented that, but anyone in New England fine art circles knew exactly who it was about. 3 institutional clients requested meetings, not with my father, not with the board at large, but with me specifically. 2 of them, after an hour's conversation each, confirmed they'd keep their business with the house. We've had concerns about Desmond's leadership for years, one admitted. Your grandmother built something rare here. It's good to see her instincts finally protected. The social fallout spread outward, quietly but unmistakably. Friends of my parents suddenly remembered other engagements. Gala invitations dried up. The Calloway name, which had opened every door on Beacon Hill for decades, now carried a small asterisk wherever it went. I didn't celebrate their humbling. I didn't mourn it either. Rosalind called me that Saturday morning. How are you holding up? Ask me again in 6 months. Fair enough. A pause. Louisa would have handled it exactly the same way, you know. The vote of confidence instead of an outright removal, giving him a chance he didn't earn. She laughed softly. She always said mercy was the ultimate power move. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. Mercy wasn't weakness. Mercy was a choice. And for the first time, the choice had been entirely mine. 3 weeks after the board meeting, my phone rang at 2 in the afternoon. My mother's voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. Odette. Can we talk? Just us. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop in the seaport, neutral ground, no chance of my father showing up with counsel. She was already there when I arrived, looking older somehow, her careful makeup unable to hide the exhaustion underneath. Thank you for coming, she said, wrapping both hands around a cup she hadn't touched. I know I don't deserve it. What do you want, Mom? To apologize. For the way we treated you. For the things we said, and the things we never said. Are you apologizing because you're sorry, or because everything changed? She flinched. The question sat between us like smoke. Both, she finally admitted. I'm ashamed to say it, but both. I was so focused on Josephine's success, on how this family looked from the outside, I told myself we were protecting you from expectations you couldn't meet. That was a lie I told myself so I wouldn't have to feel guilty. You let Dad dismiss me in front of family, in front of clients. You never once defended me. I know. A tear slipped down her cheek. I know, and I can't undo it, but Odie, I don't want to lose you entirely. I don't know if that's even possible anymore, but I had to try. I looked at this woman who'd braided my hair as a child and forgotten my birthday twice as an adult. I can't pretend the last 21 years didn't happen, I said slowly. But I'm willing to try building something new. Something honest. She nodded, unable to speak. 2 months after that, Josephine called while I was walking along the Charles River. I almost didn't answer. Odie, I know I have no right to ask, but can we meet? There's something I need to say. We sat on a bench near the footbridge. Josephine looked different, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back without any of her usual polish. I've been in therapy, she said, without preamble. Since the week after the wedding. 3 times a week. That's good. It's brutal. She laughed without much humor in it. Turns out being the golden child isn't the gift everyone thinks it is. It's just a different kind of cage. I waited. Dad expected me to be perfect at everything, every single time. Every honor was just the new baseline for what came next. She stared at the water. And the way our parents treated you, I told myself it was just how things were, that you were different, that staying quiet was somehow protecting you. You weren't protecting me. No. I was protecting myself, because if I ever defended you, I became a target too. She finally met my eyes. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. What do you want from me, Josephine? Nothing. I don't think I've earned anything. Her voice cracked. I just wanted you to know I see you now. Really see you. And I'm sorry it took me this long to look. We sat in silence, two sisters who'd grown up under the same roof like strangers. I can't go back to how things were, I said finally. But I'm not interested in staying enemies either. Maybe we start over from nothing. Her eyes filled. I'd like that. It wasn't the sister relationship I'd wanted as a kid, but maybe it could still become something real. 6 months after the board meeting, I moved into my own apartment in Cambridge, a converted brick loft with a view of the river my grandmother used to walk along on her way to the old Charles Street shop. The rent was more than I'd ever paid on my own, but I could finally afford it, on my new salary as founding director of authentication and provenance at Calloway & Vance, $172,000 a year, plus dividends from my shares. The division was my idea, built around exactly the skill I'd spent my whole life apologizing for, the kind of careful, unhurried attention to detail my grandmother would have championed if she'd lived to see it built. My father calls once a month now, short conversations, polite in a careful, distant way. He asks about the weather, about the new apartment, about the division. We both pretend the boardroom never happened. It's easier that way. My mother and I have lunch every other week, slowly, awkwardly learning to see each other as people instead of a problem to be managed. It isn't the mother-daughter relationship I dreamed about as a child, but it's honest, which is more than we ever had before. Josephine and I get coffee some weekends. We're learning each other for what feels like the first time. She's told me about the pressure she carried her entire life. I've told her about the loneliness I carried through mine. Neither of us pretends the past was fine. But we're writing something new, one careful conversation at a time. On the wall of my apartment, I hung my grandmother's portrait, the same one that watched over that boardroom for decades. Sometimes, when the evening light hits it just right, I swear I can see her almost smiling. You did it, Grandma, I think sometimes. You gave me the tools. I just had to be brave enough to finally use them. 6 months ago, I was invisible in my own family. Now I'm finally, fully myself. Looking back, I understand something now that I couldn't have understood at 28. My grandmother didn't leave me 55% of her company because I was better than Josephine. She left it to me because she knew I wouldn't let power turn me into the person it had turned my father into. My stutter isn't my flaw. It's part of who I am, the same as my patience, my memory for detail, my ability to notice what everyone else rushes past. The things that made me slow in my parents' eyes were the exact things that let me see the truth when everyone else looked away. My father judged worth by credentials, by polish, by performance in a boardroom. My grandmother judged worth by character, by patience, by how someone treats the ones who can't fight back for themselves. And now, finally, I get to judge my own worth. Not by what my parents say, not by what my sister achieved, not by what a stranger on the internet thinks of me, but by my own standard, my own measure, my own truth. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself somewhere in my story, if you've ever been the overlooked one, the dismissed one, the one they said would never amount to much, I want you to know something. You don't need a secret inheritance to prove your worth. But you do need to give yourself permission to stop chasing approval from people who were never going to give it. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors. They let you decide who gets access to your life, and on what terms. My family hurt me for 21 years, but I didn't need to hurt them back to find peace. I just needed to stop waiting for them to finally see me, and start seeing myself instead. That's the real inheritance my grandmother left me, and nobody can ever take it back. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that your worth was never up to the people who failed to notice it, I want to hear from you. Subscribe, ring the bell, and leave a comment telling me your own story. And if you want more stories like this one, ordinary people finding the courage to finally stand up for themselves, check the link in the description below. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Until next time.